It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
You're not a citizen like everybody else. Maybe we can do a gay water fountain for you or a gay pool for you, because we can kick you out of the public pools. We can kick you out of all the public restaurants, theaters, etc. This is full-blown segregation. We're going back to Jim Crow days. Okay, but it's for gay America.
Oh, all right. That was the voice of one of the Young Turks speaking about legislation awaiting the signature of Governor Jan Brewer in Arizona. We are told that these are the new Jim Crow laws. We are told that this is out-and-out discrimination and bigotry against one segment of society. A similar law under discussion in Kansas. We were told that this could deprive even life emergency services for a gay man or woman. 866-34-TRUTH. Michael Brown coming your way live from Nashville, Tennessee, breaking away from the National Religious Broadcasters Conference. I want to bring on a guest that can help us set the record straight. This is Joe LaRue, who is an attorney with the Alliance Defending Freedom, which is based in Arizona. I've got dear friends that are involved working with the ADF, doing an amazing job. Joe, you know this bill inside out. You know the way it's being reported. Could you first tell us the reality of what this bill is about, and then how it is being misreported on a national level?
Sure. And, Michael, thank you so much for having me on your show. This bill is being horribly misreported. Let me tell you what it is. SB 1062 is simply a minor amendment to a freedom bill that's been on the books in Arizona since 1999. And it merely clarifies the law protecting Arizonans from government coercion of speech. It safeguards freedom by closing loopholes that have been opened in other states and making sure that those loopholes don't open here in Arizona. And it protects citizens from being forced by the government, not by their employer, let's say, not by a private policy, but being forced by their government to violate their faith. That's what the law does. And let me tell you what the law isn't, okay? It's not anything that the opponents to the law have claimed. For instance, it's not about denying services. The bill has nothing whatsoever to do with refusing someone a cup of coffee or a sandwich or medical care. That's preposterous, and frankly, it's a flat-out lie. And I'm not upset with you, Michael, understand, but it's offensive to people of faith to suggest that people wanting to make sure that their faith is protected is tantamount to denying someone life-saving medical care. That's just offensive.
Well, why is this law even needed? Why do we need to cover the loopholes? Don't we have all the religious liberties and freedoms that we need right now in America?
Well, actually, we don't, and that's part of the problem, Michael. The Supreme Court of the United States ruled in the early 1990s that the free exercise clause that protects our religious freedom, it only has very minimal protection for us. And so in response to that, the federal government passed what is known as the Federal Religious Freedom Restoration Act, or RFRA. They passed that in the early 1990s with overwhelming support. In fact, in the entire Congress, there was only one person who voted against it. Democrats and Republicans came together. The ACLU championed it because religious freedom matters. And a number of states passed their own RFRAs to make sure that religious liberty is protected. Arizona did that in 1999. And none of the sky is falling type scenarios that opponents to SB 1062 are talking about, none of those have happened anywhere because of a RFRA.
Well, why do we need this, though? In other words, just to play the devil's advocate, why shore up these loopholes if everything is fine? I mean, the obvious answer is things aren't fine, from Elaine photography to sweet cakes by Melissa, etc. But you are on the front lines of this with the ADF, and you are dealing with cases like this constantly. So is there a real assault on the religious freedoms and liberties of American individuals and American businesses now. Are we saying the sky is falling when nothing's really happening, or are there cases cropping up across America constantly challenging our religious rights and freedoms?
You know, that's a great question, Michael, and I want to explain this in non-lawyer terms for your listeners. It was always thought that RFRA protected us from government's law forcing us to violate our faith. It was always thought that. And understand, RFRA doesn't mean that I win. RFRA just requires the courts to apply a balancing test to determine whether the government really has the right to violate my faith. That's all RFRA does. And it was always thought that RFRA applied any time government's law was being used to burden our faith. That all changed last year. Last year, with the Elaine photography case, the New Mexico Supreme Court said, if the government is not the one enforcing the government's law, in other words, if a private party sues you using the government's law and says, you have to follow the government's law, the New Mexico Supreme Court said in that situation, you have no religious liberty protection. And the price of citizenship is that you surrender your religious liberty rights. We find that intolerable. People of faith in America should be free to live and work according to their faith, and that's what SB 1062 is about.
Right, so we are simply talking about the inability of the government to rob people of their religious liberties and their freedom of conscience. And there is an absolute assault coming our way. Joe, I understand you can stay with us a couple more minutes into the next segment, but I just want you to hear this, and then you'll get to respond on the other side of the break. Let's go to clip number 10, Joey. This is John Fugelsang speaking on what he refers to as discrimination in Arizona. So listen to what John Fugelsang has to say, and when we come back on the other side of the break, for those listening into the next hour, Attorney Joe LaRue with the Alliance Defense Fund will get to respond. Just listen to what this liberal TV host has to say.
I found out that Arizona, the only state who has a governor serving on an outpatient basis, is trying to make it illegal to be gay in the name of being Christian. And what kind of anti-Christian bigot would stop me from being an anti-gay bigot? The only problem is Christ himself, the lead character of your book, never said a thing against gay people. None of y'all follow Leviticus. So really you have to face the facts that you're not being Christian by discriminating against gay people, because being gay is natural. Hating gay is a lifestyle choice.
All right, so there you have it. If you're unable to listen to the next hour, just go to my website, AskDrBrown.org, and you can do so online or catch it later in the day. Friends, at the root of a lot of the deception and backsliding in America is an exaggerated message, a false security message, a message that doesn't preach against sin. Get my book, Hyper Grace, that addresses this, together with a CD offer with it. Call right now, 1-800-278-9978. Essential reading. My bottom line today, the war is on. It's knocking at our doors. How will we respond? Is it true that states like Kansas and Arizona are trying to pass Jim Crow laws that are highly discriminatory towards one group of people in the country?
It's time for The Line of Fire with your host, activist, author, international speaker, and theologian, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Michael Brown is the director of the Coalition of Conscience and president of Fire School of Ministry. Get into The Line of Fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. That's 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
You ever get frustrated? You're watching the news. No, that's not. They're not telling the truth, or that they're putting a spin on it. And you get frustrated, and well, don't get frustrated, because we'll speak up for you. We'll set the record straight here. We'll be a voice of moral sanity and spiritual clarity here for you, so that you can stand and you can do what is right. Michael Brown coming your way live from Nashville, Tennessee, in the midst of the National Religious Broadcasters Conference. The last hour, was raising questions about, does America have a right to speak to other nations about sexual morality and marriage, and pressure Uganda and tell them that they're going to be hurt in terms of our aid and support if they pass a bill against homosexual practice? Do we have the right to lecture nations like India or Nigeria or Russia when it comes to sexual morality and family? And right now, there are laws that have been under discussion or on the way to be signed in Kansas and Arizona, most prominently, that would say, among other things, that you cannot force someone to violate their liberties in terms of Kansas, very specifically, same-sex so-called marriage. And if someone came into your bakery and said, we want a cake, and we wanted to say to Tom and Ted, and we want a picture on the cake of the two of us, that the owner could say, that violates my religious convictions. And what's happening now in Arizona is being billed as new Jim Crow laws. I've got some more clips to play for you. But my guest is Joe LaRue. He's a graduate of law school at Notre Dame University. He's part of the bar in Ohio and is an attorney with the Alliance Defending Freedom. So, Joe, right before the break, so many listeners just listening out didn't hear that, but there was a liberal media host talking about this is discrimination against one group of people. This is hating gays. Please set the record straight in terms of Arizona. And if you'd like to comment on Kansas as well, that would be great.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I listened to that clip and my mouth dropped open, literally dropped open. I've never heard anything as preposterous as that clip you played. There's so many things that I could say about the clip, but I think it'd be better to just focus on the laws that we're talking about. Everyone has got to understand that there is a difference between selling somebody paint and being forced by the government to use that paint to paint a mural that offends your personal beliefs. There's a difference between those two. And what SB 1062 is about is making sure that the government cannot force you to engage in activity or engage in speech that will offend your religious beliefs unless the law in question that's forcing you to do that can pass this balancing test. That's all it does. The clip you played talked about kicking people out of the state because of how they identify themselves, if they identify as homosexual. That's preposterous. That's not what this law is about. And frankly, that host ought to be ashamed of himself for even suggesting that.
Yeah, well, the fact is there is going to be inflammatory language used. The fact is, just like Roe v. Wade was based on falsehood, and the argument that Lawrence v. Texas was the whole case started based on false premises and so on. When it comes to just an argument based on truth, those opposing biblical morality are always going to lose. I've got one more segment with my guest, Joe LaRue. I appreciate him taking time out of his busy day. Joe, I got some more clips to play for you. Get ready.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
My guest, Joe LaRue, attorney with the Alliance Defending Freedom, telladf.org, telladf.org. A dear friend of mine for many years, Joe Franco, is a lead attorney with this same organization, and Joe and I often compare notes on these issues. Joe, I've got your blood boiling already in a way of loving truth and loving righteousness. I want our listeners to hear again the words of John Fugelsang on MSNBC. He was on The Up, the name of the show, The Up, with Steve Kornacki. I want you to hear this, and then a state rep from Arizona that was on, Rachel Maddow. So this is what John Fugelsang had to say.
I found out that Arizona, the only state who has a governor serving on an outpatient basis, is trying to make it illegal to be gay in the name of being Christian. And what kind of anti-Christian bigot would stop me from being an anti-gay bigot? The only problem is Christ himself, the lead character of your book, never said a thing against gay people. None of y'all follow Leviticus. So really you have to face the facts that you're not being Christian by discriminating against gay people, because being gay is natural. Hating gay is a lifestyle choice.
Okay, making it illegal to be gay in Arizona. And one more clip, and then I want to go to Joe LaRue for his extended comments. This is on Rachel Maddow, State Rep Damian Klinko, Democrat from Arizona. Clip number 12, Joey.
I believe I'm the only openly gay member of this House of Representatives, and so it's pretty appalling to hear a dialogue that talks about using religion to discriminate against both myself and my community. In my hometown of Tucson, I could walk out of my home and call a taxi cab and they could refuse me service. I could have a medical incident and somebody comes to my home to provide services and I could be refused. And that's not the Arizona that I want to live in.
All right, Joe, you've showed remarkable restraint not to jump in shouting in the middle of those clips. Please give me your response. Speak from your heart. Take your time.
Sure. Well, Michael, first off, let me say that I encourage all your listeners to pray for the state representative who just spoke, that he would find and experience God's love for him if he doesn't know that. But having said that, let me say he's simply, at best, wrong, and at worst, he's deliberately deceiving the public with regard to what this bill does. This bill is not going to allow a cab driver to refuse to provide cab service. It's certainly not going to allow a medical provider to refuse to provide necessary medical service. That's not what this bill's about. Let me tell you what this bill's about, and let me put this in real concrete terms so your listeners can understand. This bill is about making sure that the government cannot force a Muslim printer to print brochures promoting a conference that criticizes Islam and tell that Muslim printer he will go to jail if he doesn't print those brochures. This is about making sure that no baker who identifies as homosexual can be punished because he refuses to bake a cake for the Westboro Baptist Church that says God hates, and then that horrible slur word that the Westboro Baptist Church uses. Without this law, a baker who identifies as homosexual could be punished for refusing to bake that cake, and that breaks my heart. Nobody should be forced to give voice to that type of speech if they don't want to. This law is about making sure that a Jewish caterer can't be fined because he declines to serve pork at a Christian wedding, and the Christian wants him to serve pork. It's about making sure that the Jewish caterer has a defense to say, my religion will not allow me to do this. It's about making sure that a Quaker who's pacifist can't be intimidated into painting pro-war posters for our government. It's about making sure that faith is respected. It's not just about my faith, Michael, and it's not just about me. This law is about all faith and all people of faith and making sure that their dignity is respected and they are not treated as second-class citizens by their government. That's all the law is about. It's not about denying service. It's certainly not about letting people die. How horrible that accusation. And comparing it to Jim Crow is just beyond the pale. What this is about is making sure that the government cannot force us to violate our religious convictions unless the government has a really good reason. And the only way the government can accomplish its purpose is by making me violate my faith. And so it provides a balancing test. And sometimes when RFRA is asserted, Michael, the government wins. And the courts hold, you know what, that law really is necessary, and it's necessary applied to you. And sometimes, though, when RFRA is asserted, the government loses. And that means that the right balancing test is struck to make sure that the government can enact laws it needs to benefit the public, but also make sure that the government doesn't overreach and needlessly infringe our First Amendment freedoms.
All right, so you have passionately and with great clarity explained the scope and purpose of this law. I wrote an article similar to this a few months back addressing some of these issues and asking these very questions. Should homosexual owners of a T-shirt shop be forced to print up T-shirts for Westboro Baptist Conference saying some of the things that we would object to? And some of the same examples with Muslims, with religious Jews. So let me play the devil's advocate here for a moment and say, okay, what if you were part of a white supremacist religion and an interracial couple comes in and you own a bakery and they want you to make a cake for them, and they want on the cake, not just for them, but they want the bride to be white as she is and the groom to be black and the little figurines on there. And that person says, no, we don't do that. We don't believe in interracial marriage. And if the answer is yes, but civil rights have been established on that score, then couldn't the gay and lesbian argument be yes, but we have civil rights now and sexual orientation is considered a civil right that cannot be discriminated against? So I'm sure you've been asked these questions 1,000 times, but what's the simple response?
Sure. Michael, it's a great question. And the simple response is that happens so rarely, if at all. It really doesn't even deserve a response because the Aryan Nation Church, the white supremacist church, is so very small, thankfully. And the bigotry that they espouse is so infrequent that the example that you gave, while our opponents give that frequently, it just never happens. But having said that, if religious liberty means anything, then it must mean that all religions, whether I agree with them or not, are protected. And so if there were someone who really held those views, then they should be able to assert a RFRA defense. That doesn't mean that they'll win. It means that the court will evaluate it by applying this balancing test. And while I find the viewpoint that you described reprehensible, as I'm sure most, if not all of your listeners do, if someone actually held that religious view, and it was part of their sincerely held religious belief, if they're not entitled to assert a RFRA defense, if they're not entitled to say my religious beliefs matter, then none of us are entitled to.
Right, and then that's where the larger question would be decided, the balance that you speak of. Hey, one more clip for you to respond to. This is also on Rachel Maddow. 2 days ago, State Rep Chad Campbell, Democrat, Arizona minority leader, clip number 13.
The bottom line is, this is an attack on the gay community of the state, period. At one point, African Americans didn't have the protection. At one point, women didn't have the protection. At one point, many, many different classes did not have protection. And that is why we did what we did to correct those wrongs. This is going to be, in the future, we're going to look back on this bill, and people are going to laugh at this bill.
All right, Joe LaRue with the Alliance Defending Freedom. We've got about 1 minute, so get in your last comment in response to that quote.
Sure. Thank you, Michael. I find it preposterous, frankly, and not you, but his comment a little bit insulting. Since when is religious liberty about discrimination? Since when is wanting to defend religious liberty equal to bigotry? It's just preposterous what's being said. And the bottom line is this. The government has no business, none whatsoever, telling its citizens what they can't say or what they must say, and the government must be stopped from punishing its citizens for their ideas and beliefs. We are seeing that happen right now in America, and the government must be stopped.
All right, Joe, thank you for the courageous standing for all you do with the Alliance Defending Freedom. Friends, tell ADF.org. Find out more, and you can make a difference.